Okay, so we were talking about question one, like definitely going to be a part of your 2020 exam. If you look at question two from that year, maybe a little bit less so. So question two is not one of the two FRQs mentioned for the 2020 exam. And in question two was advertised to students to be writing a complete class. Now, when we write a complete class, we're writing methods and control structures in kind of a different way. Like we're responsible for the signatures and such now. So I think it's still really good practice. You're seeing kind of the other end of this code writing. So very good practice for us. We're writing something called a step tracker. Okay, like a Fitbit kind of thing. All right. And it's got a few things that it can do. It's created with a parameter that defines the minimum number of steps that must be taken to be considered active. So like 10,000 is used a lot, but that's not mandatory. That is their example, but you could put any number of steps that you wanted there. And the class provides a constructor and the following methods. There's three methods we're going to need to write. For each method, we'll have to pay very close attention to its signature. So there's addDailySteps, which accumulates information about steps and readings taken once per day, and I've highlighted that. I'll come back to that. Active days, which returns the number of active days, and then average steps, which turns the average number of steps per day calculated by dividing the total number of steps taken by the number of days tracked. And that total then, we'll have to have some sort of running total. And then we'd also have to sort of have a running total on days since we've started using this device. Right? So when we start writing this class, we're responsible for any instance fields that belong to it. And I like to think, okay, well, what's like the state of the object at any point? At any point, this object needs to know how many steps have been taken, and it needs to know how many days it's been in use, because I would need to know both of those numbers to determine an average. I'll need a third instance field that I can think of right away to hold on to this minimum, right? The one that is given to the constructor. So you're going to give a number to the constructor. That becomes the criterion, like the level to be considered active. We'll need to hold on to that number so that we can access it at any time. And then, like I said, we'll need to know how many steps we've taken in total. And we'll need to know how many days we've had total so we can do an average. And we'll also need to know how many active days there are at any given point. So some days are labeled active or not, and we'll need to maintain that. So, a month from now, 2 months from now, somebody might say, well, how many active days have I had? And we should be able to access that information, 5, 10, 20. So I think that's like 4 variables I just rattled off there. That's on the high end. If you look at other classes that students have had to write through the years, that's probably a little bit more. And then, like I said, there's 3 methods. 2 of them I notice are parameter lists: active days, average steps. It appears active days returns an int, average steps returns a double. And then there's addDailySteps, which appears to be void because no value is returned. So to start writing this class, let's just go in, and before we really worry about like writing some methods, let's just kind of get a feel for what the class is going to look like, its layout. And so it's public class StepTracker. I was thinking that I'm going to need about 4 private instance fields, right? So like I have a min step count, right? To be considered active. I have a total steps taken, okay? I have a total number of days. And the reason I need to know both of those is so that at any point I can get an average. And then there was another type of days that we have to count that are kind of special. These were the total active days. And so I really believe we're going to need, 4 different instance fields here. And they all look like ints to me, although if you wanted to introduce a double to help with the average, you could, but that's fine. We can just cast it later. All right. Now, sometimes students think, oh, I have 4 instance fields, so when I write my constructor, I need to accept 4 variable values, like 4 ints, but that's definitely not true here. A step tracker is constructed with only 1 single int, and it's that minimum step count, okay? So in terms of what's being passed as a parameter in, it's only the min step count value. Now, if you're wondering, well, wait, how does he know that? Well, again, it was pretty clear in the directions. Look, when they made a step tracker, they only gave it one number, and it's just that minimum step count. Now, nowhere in this problem does it say that in addition to that value that I need 3 instance fields. I had to sort of deduce that from just reading about what a step tracker is, what its capabilities are, okay, what kind of things can it do. And so I determined that, for example, if I need a step tracker to be able to determine an average of steps per day, I need to know total steps, total days. So I'm going to need variables to track those things in. And then also, if there's a method that says how many days have been labeled active, I'll need a variable to hold on to that information so that I can access it at any point. I would probably just go ahead. I mean, I guess technically you don't need to do this, but I would probably go ahead and just initialize all of these to 0 within the constructor. Okay, I think that's just good coding, but I guess you could probably get away without doing that here. Okay, they should just default to 0, but it doesn't take you too much work here to do this. Okay. All right, and now, like I mentioned, there's 3 methods that we need, and we learned about their signatures here. The first 2 are parameterless, int and a double return, active days, average steps. Okay, so public int active days, and this one is going to return an int, but let's hold off on that just for now. Okay, and then we have a public double average steps, also parameterless, and we'll write that one in a method in a minute, and then add daily steps, which is a void method. Okay, now a void method, remember, is like a modifier method, and this method, kind of different from the other ones, okay, was given sort of a special, name or feature to it. Let's go back and look at that in just a minute. And then remember, this one accepts as an integer how many steps were taken that day. Okay, so this method was not parameterless. That makes it a little bit different than the other methods as well. So addDailySteps has to accept an integer. Now the other thing is that it says right here, addDailySteps is taken once per day. So if you had a Fitbit, or like some sort of device like this, maybe like right at midnight, let's say, that thing is going to automatically, without you telling it to, run sort of a daily configuration. And that's what they're saying here. Okay, so once a day, this method's going to get called. Now that's really important. I don't know about the other methods getting called, but this method gets called once per day. And so as a result, this method call, I think, would be the best place for us to maintain the state of our object. And what do I mean by that? Well, all of these variables are going to be needing to update periodically. This would be the best time to do that because, for one, this method gets handed the value steps. That value will be inaccessible anywhere else. So, for example, you can't use the active days method really to determine if a particular day was active because nothing is given to that method. Okay, steps, which would be how you would determine if the day was active, right? The way I'm going to determine if a day was active is I'm going to ask if steps reached the min step count. And there's only one place that I can write that piece of code, okay? And it's right here. There's nowhere else that I can write that because there's nowhere else that I'll have access to the value of steps. So this is an important piece right here because if this happens, okay, then I want to take that variable active days, okay, total active days, and I want to increment it. All right, so if steps reaches the min step count, I want to count that as a total active day. I also want to do something else with steps. I want to use steps to maintain the state of my total steps. Okay, so remember, I'm also tracking my total number of steps because at some point I may need to calculate an average. And to calculate an average, I would need to know the total number of steps. To calculate an average, I'd also need to know the total number of days. So I'm going to take total days and I'm going to increment it. And you might wonder, well, why would you increment it here? Well, remember, this method is going to be called once per day. So when this method gets called is the precise timing that we should use to add this method up. I don't know when these methods are going to get called. That, like, for those methods to get called, the user of this device would have to like look at it and press a button. Okay, like tell me what my average steps are. You might go a month without calling that method. You might go 2 months without calling active days, right? But we know that addDailySteps will be called on every day by default, and so this is where we should be maintaining the state of this object. Now, in terms of like public inactive days, well, this is really just a basic accessor method. Remember, active days is stored in a variable named total active days, and I set that variable to private, okay? So this is just a plain old accessor method that just returns the value, all right? What about average steps? Well, remember, this is just a basic average method that, again, we'll just call it by taking, we'll just do a simple division, total steps divided by total days. Now, I've got a pretty good answer here, okay? And I did a lot of work, and I had to plan a lot, and I came up with 4 instance fields, and I got the signatures of my methods correct, and I hope at least, unless I got some typos in there, I've got private variables, I've got a constructor. I think this answer would still lose 2 points. It would get at best a 7 out of 9. Okay, so why would I lose 2 points if I've got so many positives here? Well, all right, I made a couple of real crucial errors in my average. One that should really never happen, right? If we're going to run this right here with a division leading to an average that wants a double, don't ever divide 2 ends, right? So we're going to need to introduce a double here to cast this. But there's another little bit more subtle trick, and it's one that I bet ruined a lot of perfect papers last year, okay? And it's that, like, if you just bought this StepTracker, took it out of the box, and you said, tell me the average steps that I've had, and you haven't even taken a step yet, okay? You haven't done anything. It doesn't crash. No, why would it crash? Well, in Java, if you divide by 0, you actually get a runtime error with ints. So dividing by 0 is really bad with ints, okay? And we don't ever want to allow a 0 division. And that's exactly what would have happened to this step tracker. If prior to addDailySteps being called, which is where we maintain the state of our object, you called average steps, well, notice that the initial values for total days and total steps were both 0. And all of a sudden, this would become 0 divided by 0. And if I want to prevent that, I actually have to just protect it with an if. So if total days equals 0, which means I'm going to end up dividing by 0, I want to bypass that and just return a hard-coded 0. So I don't want to allow it to reach my integer division here, my double division, whatever it's going to be. Okay, and Replit is acting up a little on me, so I'm going to try this. Let's see if we can get this to run, just to make sure we got all the little things right. I don't want to leave you with a typo or something. All right, so 2 of the favorite tricks of the College Board when you talk about math, 2 of their favorite tricks, and we've seen them all year if you've been in my class, okay? They love to try to get you to divide integers when you really don't want to, and you don't want an integer division, okay? So you've always got to be thinking about that. In this case, I casted. And another one that they love is to try to get you to divide by 0, okay? So let's just see let's take that off there, and see what happens, okay? And if you do make a mistake and divide by 0, see right here, it didn't crash this time because I casted it to a double. but I got not a number, okay? And not a number is not what they wanted it to say. They wanted it to say 0.0. And so I had to just hard code that in, like, hey, don't let this thing divide by 0. If that's going to happen, let's just return 0 in its place, okay? All right, and if you look at those numbers, 7,000, 9,000, 10,000, those are the exact same values you see here. I gave it the same test as we see here.